Before I begin, I think it's important that our community and myself acknowledge the privilege of doing this work, and that there are so many powerful human beings that haven't had the opportunities that we do. So our work is both based on their work and also honors the path that we've been on our whole life and the support that we received from others. And I have an extra privilege being even a member of this community and also the support of my family, and not everyone in our community has even that. So I just want to acknowledge my folks are here, my parents, and aunt and uncle, cousins. So it's really a blessing, you know, and to honor that piece. So I have about 30 minutes. I was a little nervous about how to fit all that in, and then I realized this was kind of like a DMT trip, about the same duration of a DMT trip. So I encourage you to relax, enjoy the ride, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about everything that I'm going to speak about because it's just not enough time. But I do, there are other speeches on YouTube on our Psychedelic Shine channel, and then we'll also be speaking in LA too, and I'm going to be fleshing out these ideas even more there. So check those out. Before we talk about DMT research, I want to name the holistic orientation that medicinal mindfulness approaches takes this work with, and there's scientific and creative ways to use medicines. There are spiritual and psychological ways to use medicines, and we want to acknowledge that we honor all of them, and they're not mutually exclusive. And this theme is going to come back around as we go. And who I am professionally is I'm a psychedelic facilitator. I use cannabis and breath work. That's what is accessible to us now. But we are actually able to induce DMT-like states with this practice, if you can believe that. But I'm also coming from a clinical and a transpersonal orientation. And the reason I want to specifically name the transpersonal piece is that it has a long history in the psychedelic sciences tradition. It was developed by Stan Groff through his LSD experiment. So the orientation that Andrew and I have, even though it's maybe transcends science in some areas, incorporates science. The last presentation I gave, I spoke about aliens, angels, and spirits of Gaia. And to some people, that's a very radical idea. This is something that Dr. Strassman talks about, Dr. Dennis McKenna, Andrew just spoke about this. But I want to mention that I don't think it's mutually exclusive to science, that I personally believe in a soul, that I have a soul and we each have a soul, and that I've been here before and will be again. And I also believe in energetics. And these words are just words, they're just labels, but they might be able to describe something extra-dimensional, higher dimensional, right? And maybe a soul is a little closer to our awareness than we would normally think. And I just want to name that 86% of the people in the world have some sort of spiritual belief system. They may not agree with what the details are, right? But it's not that far out of the box to be speaking in these terms. And it's interesting that Dr. Gallimore and I, we haven't spoken on the phone. This is the first time we've met. We've had some great email exchanges. Like I said, I sent him my last speech to see if he thought I would be crazy enough to do this work with him. But there's, as you say, we use a similar even slides, that there's something emerging from a broader field than individual consciousness. That reality is larger than four-dimensional space, and this is our current scientific understanding of reality. This is this multidimensional or higher than four-dimensional reality concept is what theoretical physicists are coming from, right? This is what the experts are doing, right? So the question, is this real? For this project, I'm coming from an orientation that fully honors the possibility that the inner experience of DMT is real, as well as other psychedelics, and that they go beyond the mechanisms of psychology or neurology. And in my practice, I take steps to actively engage it because it is the best way I know how to support my clients who are actively experiencing it. and not engaging the phenomenon in this way feels negligent to me as a practitioner. And I really mean that. But I also want to say that I'm not coming from an orientation that assumes it's real. While I personally come from a spiritual or energetic and also a multidimensional perspective, I'm not necessarily coming from a religious one. So personally, I have absolutely no idea what's going on here. But I am completely enthralled by the ideas of it. And I'm not sure if someone can have an opinion on the realness of the experience without having tried it. And personally, I think the skeptics would make great volunteer journeyers for the experience, right? Because they're going to be like really checking it. So I want to go into a little bit. So we kind of go in this spiritual dimension. We go into this alien dimension, you know, and I want to name. Let's see. Hold on. Play with the idea of the science fiction of Andrew Gallimore. And I think it's important to acknowledge the sci-fi vibe that's permeating this project. And the fact that Dr. Gallimore is even flying in from the Technical Institute in Japan feels incredibly futuristic to me, right? There's something about it, like a Japanime thing going on here. But psychedelics have clearly had a huge influence on the sci-fi genre. But we're stepping into the science fiction realm of science and psychedelics, not in the way that is fantasy fiction, but rather as a conversation on predicting the future. What that future could look like, and bringing it into this context, something hyper-scientific, advanced medical technology fused with DMT stream right into human consciousness. If we did this, I'm pretty sure someone would make a movie out of it. And these are some of the movies that I think about when I think about this type of research, right? Matrix, even Flatliners. I don't know if y'all have seen that. You know, Interstellar. All these concepts of like working with higher dimensionality and other dimensionality are really present in our culture. You know, and these are just a few examples. I could have gone further and further into that. But I want to also send a shout out to Philip K. Dick, you know, the mastermind of science fiction, alternate reality universes and things. You know, like there's something permeating our culture that is pointing to other dimensionality. And maybe this is a possibility of exploring that. Before we go into that, though, I want to bring a little bit into talk about the societal set and setting of where we are, right, as a culture. Psychedelics are being mainstreamed, and Dr. Strassman, when I was talking to him about this work, he described it as the Prozacification of psychedelics. And I want to name, first and foremost, that I'm a huge supporter of using psychedelics for clinical purposes, and also like microdosing with LSD, you know, smaller doses and that sort of thing for the treatment of mental health concerns, or also end-of-life anxiety, that sort of thing. But acceptance of mainstream culture means that it has to be, it's legal, and it has to have a purpose. MDMA for PTSD, for example, ketamine for depression, that sort of thing. I want to fully support this, but I want to also acknowledge a few other things. That there's an underlying psychological reason for the mainstreaming trend. And for some people, it is an attempt to heal a very, very deep trauma caused by prohibition and the academic trauma of a very important field of study being shut down. And we can tell there's an underlying psychological component of this need to mainstream it because of the charge that is present when people confront us when they perceive that something we're doing isn't mainstreamable, right? It's not good for the movement. This trend to mainstreaming requires us to minimize the bizarre or spiritual nature of these psychedelic experiences. And for a lot of us in our community, these are the most important, most profoundly healing, transformational aspects of the experience. And it might also minimize the need, and may actually be dangerous, to undervalue this part of the experience because the psyche, like what Dr. Gallimore was saying, it's real to the psyche. Right? And so if we engage it as real, we can better address what's happening. But here's the most important thing I'd like to name about the mainstreaming effect of psychedelics. And so I'm a psychedelic facilitator. My primary practice is working with people who use psychedelics or who have taken a psychedelic and come to me and say, okay, now what? Right? And most people, I don't know, maybe most people, I could even say all people, almost all people that I work with, and I believe that this is a good sample of our community, they're leaving the mainstream culture in droves. Some are literally fleeing, right? You don't take a psychedelic and say, oh my God, I want to be an accountant, Right? Like there's an energetics occurring here, some sort of transformation in consciousness. That doesn't mean you can't bring, you'd be a good accountant and use psychedelics, right? But it's something some people struggle with. So there's some sort of disconnect between the idea of mainstreaming psychedelics and the actual psychedelic community itself. I'm not sure I fully understand that yet, but this is what I'm seeing. So a better framework, in my opinion, would be to use psychedelics to transform what mainstream means, right? Instead of trying to fit psychedelics into a mainstream box, like a hypercube into a square, right? It doesn't work, nor would we really want to do that. But there's other areas that it's showing up in, the societal set and setting. There's actually another research program going on right now with DMT in the UK. And I wanted to pull out some quotes from this. They're really amazing, spine-tingling ideas referring to entities and things, but, arguably they're bullshit. And it's quite easy to hear a lot of pseudoscientific musings, and this idea of the, quote, spirit molecule is in that space. Later adding that psychedelic researchers worry that they, as individuals, will be stigmatized and thought of as not serious scientists. And, the stigma is very, very real. And this is what MAPS has to work with, Johns Hopkins, everybody, to do the work they do. They have to really pay attention to the stigma. But maybe it's important to acknowledge that there are more places in the world to do the work than just acting as a scientist. Maybe it's important to pull these ideas out of the constraints of just scientific inquiry and put it in a larger container. There's a tsunami of younger professionals ready to do this work with very few opportunities. Myself, one of them. We're used to having to blaze our own trails, right? And believe me, I think we just recruited a nurse for this experiment today, right? And this is why we wanted to do these experiments or these gatherings, is to meet the people who can do the work and are inspired to do the work. And that there's another generation that we're going to draw from to recruit a team for this, and that is the older professionals who are near retirement age. For them, it's a now or never moment, and the stigma, professional risk are completely negligible. So I can imagine there being an intergenerational team that's coming from this. Oh, you shouldn't do something radical around psychedelics now because the backlash that's going to happen. Right, the war on drugs is back. Sessions and Trump. I've never been one to acquiesce to the demands of a bully, first of all, right? And not many people in our community do that. I've gotten a few licks for it, but I want to name that there's another picture happening, and that the FDA, the federal government, everything is not the whole picture. And that just like in Colorado, the cannabis, another psychedelic, is becoming legalized across the country and the world. And now they're starting to use this model to legalize other psychedelics. And I mentioned this, that Oregon might be voting to legalize psilocybin mushrooms. So the question is this the right time? Should we wait for the institutions or administrations to change? Regardless, given the pre-human history of psychedelic medicine use, I'm pretty sure our culture will outlast this current administration, right? But there's something to point out, to note here, is there's no time for caution. We're in this critical period, and we need all the tools we can get to, one, heal ourselves so that we quit hurting others, heal the planet so that my kids can thrive and my grandkids can thrive, and that if we wait too long, there's no going back, right? So we've been playing around with these ideas. What would DMT research, extended state DMT research, look like? And DMTx is the shorthand version of extended state DMT research, and Dr. Strassman calls it the continuous infusion study. I like to call it cyber DMT because it's an infusion of advanced medical technology with organisms, right? So like a cybernetic, right? What would a scientific study with DMTx possibly look like that is both congruent with science, right? We can't not do that, right? It makes no sense, but not restrained by science as a sole paradigm. So I don't know if you've noticed, but the idea of doing a continuous infusion of the most extreme state we can imagine as consciousness explorers goes against this mainstreaming idea. It goes against the Prozacification idea, right? But we're not just a community of scientists. I'm using this term that a friend helped me develop. We're self-empowered healer explorers, and we're of a particular lineage, Strassman McKenna lineage, right? Not just Terence McKenna, but Dennis McKenna too, and Dr. Strassman, who initially did this research. It's a powerful lineage to be a part of, and very legitimate. I used to think that this was some sort of outlier, this lineage, but I think it's only an outlier in the psychedelic science community. I sincerely believe our orientation may be a large majority of those who identify as psychedelic medicine people. And so for the purpose of proposing extended state DMT research, for me is not just to do the research, but to reframe the community conversation to include the psychological needs of our community, to be explorers and to be ourselves, without having to prove anything to the culture and politics that have repeatedly attempted to snuff us out. Not only the research, but the actual people who are called to be explorers of consciousness. This is a really stupid game, and it's been played out by dominant Western culture for millennia. I think for me it's time to change that script because I personally didn't agree to it. Right? We're not just scientists in our community, we are trailblazers, tricksters, activists, and artists. Why would we not want to express ourselves fully in the work that we do in the world? We have had the freedom to, if we had the freedom to make a proposal without the constraints of conforming to the mainstream while addressing the paramount needs for safety and rigorous scientific standards, what would that actually look like? If we didn't have to frame everything in the response to trauma and mental illness, what would we want to explore for ourselves as a psychedelic community? Do you see how we can reframe the conversation so that we can actually show up, be useful to the world, but actually still be ourselves? So a holistic approach to psychedelic research would be, if we hold this orientation that includes science but is not controlled by it, we have an opportunity to create a study within a larger but still legitimate paradigm. This holistic approach is congruent with scientific inquiry. It honors the spiritual beliefs of our community. It's in alignment with providing the necessary psychological support to put somebody in a DMTx state, and it's congruent with the identity of our psychedelic community. Before we talk about DMTx, I would like to acknowledge the cutting-edge clinical research now being conducted on psychedelics for the treatment of mental health concerns and other issues like the end-of-life care. Without the work of MAPS, with MDMA, or Johns Hopkins, with psilocybin, not to mention all the others, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I'd be doing that research there. I would be providing support to those communities. But if that's covered, what else is there to explore? And it would be easy for our imagination to spiral out into radical extended state DMT research proposals. And as a projection screen, this is what people in the world and even in our community, other researchers think we're doing. It's like getting wild here, right? In my opinion, this study is actually a natural manifestation of Dr. Strassman's original research. Dr. Strassman's research in the early 90s was the spark that initiated the new renaissance of psychedelic research by being the first to break free and break through the prohibition of research in the United States. And this was a really big deal. The implications of his study were enormous. Everything, could be argued, stemmed from that work. He was the first to break through. And of course, other organizations were doing the work, but he showed it was possible. But did he do something grand? In the study itself, no. As Dr. Gallimore mentioned, he took blood samples, he took heart rate, he took blood pressure, and it was a phase 1 safety study. He gave DMT to people and saw what it did. He didn't need an unusual protocol approved to take really good notes. And that was the foundation of his book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule. And this book was seminal in developing the interest in many of the people in psychedelic renaissance, and myself included. A powerful reality emerged from a simple exploratory study. And let's not underestimate that in this context. And let us also remember that Dr. Strassman did this mostly entirely on his own. We are in a radically different situation now. Dr. Strassman was able to camouflage the motivations for his interest in the study to help him through the approval process. And I don't think we'll be able to do that in this context and have that advantage in 2017, given that we're having conversations around aliens and spirits and that sort of thing, right? But that doesn't mean we can't form the idea into something that can work scientifically. So holding on to the larger vision we can, what is just the next step to reintroduce DMT research into the American culture that is both in alignment with the core interests of our community, but can also make it through the FDA, DEA approval gauntlet? And maybe it's a simple phase 1 safety study and we replicate Dr. Strassman's results, but from the beginning we use the DMT anesthesia machine into the administration of DMT instead of a syringe. A study such as this is something that you were already speaking to, would start to slowly push the edge of duration and intensity. And sure, there was a big safety question, of course. We would be very, very proactive in regards to safety. But it would push the peak experience further and further. We take all the measurements and assessments we can, physiologically, psychologically, before, during, and after. We take really, really good notes. Not just with the pencil and paper, like with Dr. Strassman, but with whatever tech we can get our hands on, right? And this is 2017. There are things that are available to us now that wouldn't be available 10 years ago in the 90s and 60s and so on. And if the aliens just happen to show up, maybe we can get them on film, right? But seriously, if there is a way to scientifically prove the existence of something beyond this space, I've done this work enough to know that it's easy to jump too far into our vision, right? If we can determine that there's a way to scientifically prove the existence of something other than this space, I think it will come out of these initial experiments. I don't think we can know what those would look like right now. So my question for skeptics in our field and in the world would be, help us design these experiments. What would it take to convince someone? Let's see if we can implement it. But for me, this is not just any scientific experiment. And coming from a transpersonal perspective, it is impossible to not acknowledge the potential cultural impact a research like this one could have on society. If Strassman's was the first expression of a larger and difficult to understand transpersonal cycle of consciousness evolution, creating a program that effectively and safely extends the DMT experience, maybe the next manifestation of an equally culturally inspiring trend. DMT to DMTx is a quantum leap in our capacity to explore consciousness. And personally speaking, this sounds like a deeply inspiring path to me. So how do we do it? So I've been sitting with this question for many months. It's been something that I do as a creative process. Working with cannabis and doing the circles is a deeply inspiring process and experience for me, but it's my day job. I'm looking for something that's creative outlet, to explore the edges of my potential, right? And doing this work has, thinking about this and visualizing, making it happen, is pushing those edges of what I'm capable of. And that's exciting to me. So what would a team look like? There would be a mission control, support staff. Everybody in the room would kind of be on the journey together. So there would be accountants and bookkeepers and all of this outside of the circle. I would like personally to be with a lead facilitator and guide in a situation like this. I believe I have the capacity to hold that for someone and ensure their psychological safety. Right? But we'd also have medical and research staff, right? Anesthesiologist, medical doctor, nurse, ensure physical safety. And then we would need a whole group. We've already gotten the beginnings of a media team together. They're here today, fundraisers, networkers, to actually spread this message and make it viable. Remember, we're in the world of social media, right? We need to use these things that researchers in the past didn't have without sensationalizing it, right? We're going to get that a lot. Oh, you're sensationalizing this. And then technical advisors, a lot of medical doctors and other PhDs. Rick Strassman would be a good example of that, helping us out. And we must not forget that artificial intelligence, being a member of a team of something like this, we can say that's sci-fi, but 5-10 years, that's going to be a reality, right? And so why not have some capacity to analyze the complex data that we might be getting? So just a couple of guys here. These guys have an open invitation to be part of this. I really, like, if, doesn't make a lot of sense to me to do it in a way that wouldn't appeal to Dr. Strassman and Dr. Gallimore. I'm pretty clear we're going to need their help. I'm in communication with both of them, and we're not at this point of talking to Dr. Strassman about an endorsement yet. This will come later from showing the support of our community for this project. Then I'm going to approach Dr. Strassman about receiving his support. But I'm going to visit him a couple of weeks and share what we've discovered, and we're going to keep going. So these guys have an open invitation, and if you ever see them, talk to them about moving here so we can make this a little easier on all of us, But we are gathering the team together. Like I said, we're playing with, we might have a nurse involved, but one person that was really important for me to recruit for this, it didn't make a lot of sense for me to stand up here without having some sort of concrete support from people that I trust and know me and trust me. This is Dr. Carla Clemens. She's right over here. I've asked her to be our principal investigator. She has research experience with MAPS and the MDMA for PTSD study. One of my former professors at Naropa and is an expert in assessments. And I think she could melt the heart out of any DEA or FDA person to let them do what we want to do here. So really grateful to have her. And just these initial responsibilities was we need some accountability. And so me just coming up here and saying, oh yeah, I got this, I'll take your money and do it right, doesn't feel enough to me. So it's just an initial stage. Carla's going to be our accountability officer, and she's also going to help chair the protocol development steering committee, So we got a lot of work to do, Carla. Fearless experts. This is a term from Terence McKenna, that we can't just have healthy volunteers in a study like this. We need fearless experts. And what does that mean? That there would be advanced skill set development. Like one of the things that's different between the 60s and now is that we have something in the popular mainstream culture called mindfulness, and psychological maturity and depth, and a lot of theory behind that, what it means to be a healthy human being, a resilient human being, right? And on one side of this bell curve, we have what we're called disordered, and on the other side, we have giftedness, and that we can actually train these capacities in human beings before we put them in the DMTx chair, right? And that is addressing the safety concerns. What if they go crazy? What if it's overwhelming to them? Well, we can actually have a little more control over that. We can assess people's mental health, and we can also develop these capacities that are going to be important for extended state DMT exploration. And I don't want to go into all of those, but these qualities aren't just required for the people going through the experiment, but also the people who are facilitating the experiment, the team members, that we need to have a really healthy systems in place to ensure that it doesn't just crash out of just like having such an extreme experience. These are some of the sample qualifications that I've been working with. We want people who are a little older, who've made it through their 20s, alive and well. There'd obviously be some really specific and necessary restrictions on individuals' medicine use, because these medicines can be ungrounding. Some sort of practice or some traditional medicine training. And then health and well-being in self and your body, right? You want a strong body to be able to do this. We talk about being in extended state for a long period of time. And then the completion of some sort of psychonaut training so that we can assess people's capacities to engage these spaces. Does that make sense? And so this is one of the things that I have the capacity to work on, and what I've been doing for the last 3 or 4 years, or 5 years now, is training people to be more competent navigators of inner spaces. And in a situation like this, we can't just have any, again, a healthy volunteer. We need somebody who's very adept at like keeping their shit together when big things happen to them, right? So I'm proud to announce, so we have our principal investigator, we've got our sitter, we got our nurse over here. This is Shane Moss. He's our hyperspace volunteer trainee #1. And I had the opportunity to do some work with Shane in a circle, or in a journey that we did together. And we really showed a capacity to do deep inner work, even in a very distracting environment, lights on, cameras around, and all of that. So that's a skill set. He also has a skill set of being able to report back in the present moment, which will be an interesting skill set. But another thing that I think is important to name with Shane and the intensity of saying yes to experiments like this is a capacity to be able to handle the spotlight, capacity to be able to handle criticism, and being somebody who's used to the stage. That's somebody that I think can hold that capacity and be a teacher and a facilitator for future trainees. And this is I've already talked to Shane about this. This is not my decision. If we did this, it wouldn't even still be my sole decision. So there's no guarantee that Shane would be part of the experiment itself. But he's going to help me actively develop this training protocol so that we can pass it out to the world, to you all, so you can train for it, and then when you're ready, you can sign up for it. So we got the principal investigator, we got me, we got a volunteer, like what Andrew said. Andrew, to be honest, I think since you invented this, you might be the first one that should go into it. So we'll get you get you trained up for it. It's your buddies, right? That'll be fine. But, so we call our spaces alchemy labs because they're transformational containers. And we're also trying not to take from other traditions. And alchemy is a very Western European tradition and fits my genetics. So it's the language that I use. And this was the lab that we did with Shane. So we need an upgrade. This isn't going to work for DMTx experiment. So just to throw this idea out here, here's a inn. You might have heard of Alps Inn. It's for sale right outside of Boulder. It's only $4.5 million. And so what we can do is have a cannabis retreat center on the lower levels, and on the 3rd floor there's this perfect room for this research. So I'm just throwing it out there if anybody has any extra money they'd like to throw this way. I'm open to the possibility of doing it in other countries, but I really think I'm looking for sustainability. I'm looking to do this the rest of my life, and I can't keep traveling out of the country to a particular location to keep doing this research. So I'm really committed to doing this work through the mechanisms of the FDA, and that's not going to be my job solely. I don't have the credentials for that, but I do have the credentials to motivate, inspire, and organize. And sit. I'm a sitter, right? But I also have a strong preference to get it out of the hospital, right? Given what I know about these experiences, it might actually be less safe to be in a hospital than outside of the hospital. So in a sense, we'd have to bring the hospital, or at least some of the hospital, with us to a retreat center like this one or another one. So here's the room that I envision being in the room. That honors the needs of our community, and also the need to facilitate a potentially sacred experience. On this, over here we have the medical team, including anesthesiologist with the anesthesia machine. I'm assuming we would need another medical doctor in the room and a nurse. There would be emergency medical equipment in case there is some sort of event. Again, I understand it to be safe as well, but we don't want to not prepare for that. Lead guide and co-guide, male, female. It's a really good model. Sensors and cameras with the technician. There's going to be a lot of equipment in the room, I think. And then, of course, we have to have AI. And A volunteer sitter, it really should be important to have somebody in the room who's not required to do anything but just hold space, so that that is part of a training to be a lead or co-facilitator. And then on the far side here, some sort of meditation table and an image to provide a sense of importance, security, safety, something non-scientific. So you can imagine this DMTx psychonaut sitting up and being able to see a beautiful image by one of our leader artists, that sort of thing. And then outside of this room, we'd have some sort of mission control, support staff, extra sitters to sit with the person after an extended stay in DMT space. And all of this stuff can't beep, so I don't know how we're going to do that, but, at least as a sitter, that would be something important to me. So low light, can't beep, music, and super safe. I like to imagine, I mentioned this before, but this chair or bed or whatever the person is going to be in, I'd love to imagine that being designed by artists and leaders in our community. I can see somebody like Alex and Allison Gray doing something like that. So we might incorporate these ideas into like a community development program around work like this. So what are the next steps? We created a website, DMTx.org, where you can sign up to be part of the protocol team, ask about volunteer opportunities, and also give donations. For me, I've decided that I'm always framing this of we're going to do this, not if we get the money we're going to do this or whatever. I'm seriously living into we're going to do this. So to me, the donations are about, well, how fast can we do it, right? And if even it's not me or this team, maybe we're going to inspire somebody to get off their science butt and figure out how to do it, right? So, and also a newsletter sign up. So, with people who are not here, I would encourage you to check out this DMTx.org. But to me, it's important to name that if we were to rely on volunteers for this work, I wouldn't be able to do this work. And neither would the media team that's here. Creating a Kickstarter campaign is a lot of work. And so what we're looking for is like a psychedelic seed. $25,000 to $50,000. Every time I think about the numbers, they have a tendency to go up. But the seed would provide this necessary capital to initiate the program. And there's not a lack of funds in our community. This particular room full of people could probably pull that together in a way that didn't affect anybody's finances. But it is a question that still remains of, is it, will happen? And all I can say is I will continue to meet this work as it unfolds to the best of my ability. And so far, if this is real, we have been met by a synergetic presence that appears to be helping us along the way. And theoretically speaking, this shouldn't be any different. This step that we've done shouldn't be any different. The fact that Andrew Gallimore is here, 4 months after I first gave that presentation at the Boulder Theater, I think is part of that trend. Him saying yes to it, me saying yes to it, other people saying yes to it. Everybody just keeps saying yes to it, and all of a sudden it starts to manifest and happen. But what we would need is to develop the operational structure, develop the fundraising and media team, develop the protocol steering committee, which I'd like Carla to chair, with the appropriately credentialed members. This would require a lot of scientific understanding and working together. And then my favorite part is creating the DMTx Psychonaut training protocol and release it to the psychedelic community. And then from the people who play with these protocols and explore it, we would integrate them into some sort of training program. So here's a challenge. Again, I'm not a fundraiser. My day job is a healer. I don't know, how to convince you to give me money for this. Go home, set a safe space and an intention, and smoke something. Like, say, cannabis, right? That's legal here, right? But that's not your only option. And ask yourself if you should participate in this in some way or support us in some way. I think that might be the most persuasive argument that I could make. We're having a breathwork session tonight here with the intention of breaking through any personal and collective blocks to doing this research. That's the intention, the group intention tonight. And if you want to come breathe with us. Just come to our table. And one of the things that I really like, so we're looking at possibly ways of funding indirectly through art and music. Here's our new email address, dmtx@medicinalmindfulness.org. But if you have a great sci-fi idea, write a story about extended state DMT research. If you're an artist, paint something, do some graphic images. And this is something, if we can bring it all together in a cohesive form, maybe this is something that we can sell as a fundraiser and support a scientific inquiry through art and music. And that's just one idea, right? And then we have a blog called Letters to Molly Blog, and as we get them, we'll post them and get some community feedback. The other thing that we're going to do moving forward after today is there's a metamorphosis happening in my program. And I've been facilitating cannabis circles for almost 4 years now, pretty consistently, like on a very regular basis. We've been doing the breath work for 3 years now. But this is a 10. This is our 10th psychedelic shine, a symbol of completion. And at the same time, shine is moving, so something is shifting out of our space here as well. So I'm honoring this as a metamorphosis that's occurring, and I am not attached to how my program has been in the past being the same way it is in the future. So I'm ready to step right into this research. And we actually have a whole team of people who are ready to step into this research and to recruit the team ready to step into this research. Sometime in the fall, Matt Bovard over here, New Revolutions, is going to help us throw a big party and a celebration. We're going to give an update of what happens between today and October. And we're going to invite you all to it. So if you want to know what's going on, get on our newsletter. And we're going to use this as a banner, this extended state DMT research as a banner to bring together our community. I've learned that our psychedelic community needs a really great idea to bring a lot of us together. And as I said before, I've never been inspired by an idea as much as I have by this one. So I think it's really astounding that we've actually gotten this far and actually are able to, invite Andrew here and give a presentation. There's a groundedness here that sometimes we don't acknowledge. We are all pulling ourselves out of this muck of madness. It's happening on a global scale at the moment, and we're not coming from a neutral orientation into this research. So for me, I'm not doing this to prove the existence of aliens or spirits, although I have to admit, I think that was really cool. I'm doing this to evoke that original spark struck by Dr. Strassman and to fan that flame of intense interest and desire in our growing community of explorers and medicine people, and to simply just see what comes of that. In doing this research, I would also like to suggest that we acknowledge our privilege. And from a long-term perspective, once we understand how to administer an extended state DMT experience safely, we can begin exploring the complex problem-solving potential and utility of this medicine experience. Similar to what Dr. James Fadiman is doing with microdosing and LSD, except it's the exact opposite. It's the most profound, long psychedelic experience we can with DMT infusion. But remember that the intensity and duration of the DMT experience can be dialed in. And what if we could find that sweet spot? Can we teach experts how to navigate this terrain for a particular purpose? Stable, higher dimensional perception seems like a serious adaptive survival strategy for our planet at this time. We have more than anecdotal evidence that psychedelics combined with the advanced understanding of a complex problem will lead to scientific breakthroughs and cultural innovations. So think Steve Jobs, LSD, and the iPhone as just one example. And look what came from that, right? Again, we're trying to create these seeds that burst forth like what Dr. Strassman did. What if we had someone in this experiment like the historical Nikola Tesla or an Albert Einstein or major world players like even a Barack Obama? What would come of that? Or climate scientist, or an agricultural scientist, or theoretical physicist? What if we could accelerate world-transforming breakthroughs? So the underlying question, the scientific question for me is, can this experience be helpful, not only from a personal, psychological perspective, but also from an advanced global scale problem-solving perspective? This gives us the opportunity to use our privilege in a way that may actually give back to society, rather than try to escape from it, either to Mars or another hyperdimensional space dimension. It is an idea that both honors our community's needs to have an explorer identity, one that is not defined by the mainstream, but yet supports the health and well-being of all people on the planet. In other words, the mainstream. So to me, this is what transforming the world could look like. And I don't mean that haphazardly. I'm sincere about that. And it's the work of Dr. Strassman, Dr. Gallimore, and all of these others that can make this possible. But for us to meet it, we have to come together as a community. And I don't have to inspire all of you. I just need to inspire some of you to work with us to make that happen. And I sincerely believe we will.